Hello everyone and welcome back to Microsoft Access 2016 Basics. My name is Steve Bishop, and in this video we're going to be talking about combining table data using a join. So we have several tables and we've got data in our tables, but there's certain ways that those different pieces of information, those records in those tables, are related to one another. So we might have three separate people and three separate addresses, but there's kind of this inner mix of what are the different relationships between the people and the addresses. Maybe the first person is, we have an address for the school and for their office, and for the second person we have their home and their office address, and then of course for the third person we have their office address and their school. So we have this relationship between all of the people and these addresses, and it's kind of a complex tapestry of how these different relationships are connected. So how do you take information from one table that might contain all of the person information and combine it with the address information? Well, that's where the join statement comes in. This is where you actually specify how the two tables or how the multiple tables should be related to one another. So there's two basic kinds. There's the inner and the outer joins. So let's say that we have one person who has a cell phone. But then we have in our database, our table that is containing the phone information, we have two additional phones that don't belong to anybody. We're just keeping track of them. And this happens from time to time. Maybe not necessarily with phones, but there might be some other pieces of information that isn't necessarily related to some other table. It's just information we're storing in that table to keep track of it. But if there is no relationship, but there typically is a relationship between two tables, what happens if I want to see all of the numbers and the people who are related to those numbers, even if that phone doesn't belong to a person? Well, that is essentially an outer join, where you show everything. Show me all of the phones and show me all the people who are related to that phone. But then there is an inner join, where you only show where there is a relationship with that data to some other record in the other table. So that's what you really have to understand about inner joins and outer joins. An outer join shows everything, regardless of whether or not there's a connection between the two tables. And an inner join only shows those records where there is a related record in that other table. Let's jump into Access and see how this outer and inner join connection can be demonstrated in a SQL query. So here in my query 1, we've got our people table that's being queried, and we're filtering the results so that only people with a salary of $50,000 or greater are going to be displayed, and the person type is 1, so that means they have to be an employee, right? Well, how do we know that this person type is employee? I mean, if we run this query, let me just do a data sheet view here, and we select, actually, let's go back here and select so that we can actually see person type there. And now if we look at it, we're going to see person type is 1. Well, that's not really helpful unless I absolutely know already that a person type of 1 is employee and a person type 2 is customer. But for somebody reading the output of this query, just seeing person type 1 or 2 is not really that helpful. Like, wouldn't it be nice if I could see on this people types that type name, right? I'm going to get employee or customer instead of this 1 or 2. So I'm going to go back to the query, and I'm going to go into the design view. And what we need to do is we need to add to this query the people types table. So I'm just going to right click on this open area here, and I'm going to select show table. And from here, I can go and find the people types table and select add. Now once I do that, there's going to be this relationship that's already been established that says that this is a one-to-many relationship. So we have this line drawn that is describing the relationship between these two tables, right? And we set that up earlier when we were going to the database and we went into the relationships, and there it is. And we established that in here there's going to be some referential integrity and all that sort of stuff. So there's kind of this locked in relationship already in place of a one-to-many relationship between people types and people. Now what we're doing is we're taking that relationship and saying, okay, now that we have this relationship between these two tables, and there are related records to one another between these two tables, we can take the information and display in our query here information from both of those tables about each record. So on this person that we're filtering, which is really just me, right? If we look at people, the only record I'm getting is Steve Bishop here, right? So now what I want to do is I want to take this type name column that belongs to the people types table, and I'm going to drag it onto our columns to display from our query. And I'm going to uncheck this person type because, again, 1s and 2s and 0s aren't really that helpful. But type name should be, because that should give us the employee or customer designation. Now let's go ahead and save this. And I'm going to right click here. And I'm going to go to Datasheet View. And voila, this is a lot more helpful information, right? I can see this is type name is employee. That's much more helpful than the 1s or 2s, right? So this is how joining really can be helpful, right? We've got the relationships established between the two tables. And in our query, we're using that same relationship. If we go to the design view, we're still seeing that same relationship, but now we can kind of grab the columns from the different tables and throw them here on our query to say, these are the columns of information I want to see about each one of the people. And that's really cool. Now, this happens to be an inner join. And if we go take a look at the SQL behind this, so I'm just going to right click and go to SQL View, you'll see that our from statement has been altered fairly significantly. Instead of just saying from people in our where statement, now we have from people types, inner join people. So we've got this inner join statement. We've got an additional table name here of people types. And we even have this on statement followed by people types ID is equal to people.personType. So this is how we express in SQL the relationship between the tables, which are people types, and people. And we're saying join. We're doing specifically an inner join, not just joining, but we're doing an inner join between the people's types table and the people table. And the relationship is actually between the people types.id column, right? The ID column of people types, and the person type column on the people table. So we're explaining here, right? This is the relationship that these two tables have, and the columns that relate those two tables together are the ID column of people types and the person type column of people. And that is how we are setting it up in SQL, in the language itself, the syntax, how this relationship is set up between the two tables. Now, what if I go to the people table and let's say that I change person type of Steve to 3. Okay, you cannot add or change a record because a related record is required in the people types. So there's this constraint happening here between my people and my people types. So I can't just go in and change person type to 3 because people types doesn't have an ID of 3. So I could simply go in here and say, okay, people types, I want to have a new one. It's going to be 3. It's going to be type name. But what I want to demonstrate is what happens if there is no relationship between Steve Bishop, this record of Steve Bishop on the people table, and people types. What if there is no ID of 3? But I still maybe want to see people, right? I still want to see that record. How do I make that happen? So in order for this to happen, I actually need to go back into the relationships, and I need to go to edit the relationship, and I'm going to uncheck the enforce referential integrity. So that's what the enforce referential integrity was doing, is it's saying, look, you can't make a change to this record in this table unless you have a corresponding record in the other table that coincides with it, right? You can't do both, right? You have to do one or the other. So I'm just going to turn that off for right now, and I'm going to leave it okay. Database engine cannot lock table people because it's already used by another person or process. That's right. I already have people open. So if you get that error, it just simply means that you probably have a query or you're looking at the table data already. So I can't change the relationship of a table if I'm in it and editing it. So I actually need to close all this stuff down except for the relationships. I'm going to keep that open. I'm going to close that. Okay, so I'm going to cancel this back. I can't. Okay, can't save. That's good. People types. I'm going to close that as well just to make sure. And now I'm going to go back into people's types. Or actually, we're going to go into the relationship here between the two tables. Edit the relationship. Drop the enforce referential integrity and click OK. Okay, so now we still have a relationship, but it doesn't really understand that relationship, right? We got rid of that relationship essentially. Okay, now let's go back to our query one. We've dropped this, hey, everything needs to be directly linked, and this is how the relationships are set between the tables. We've gotten rid of that, what we call schema. We've kind of dropped all those constraints, and now we're more or less handling it specifically in our queries. Like our queries are now going to say, this is how the data is related. So if we go back into our SQL view, once again, we have inner join people on people. We have this inner join happening between people types and people. Now I can go back into the people table and I can change person type from 1 to 3. And it's not going to complain anymore because I dropped that referential integrity. And now I have this situation in my query where we're saying only show the records between people types and people where there are corresponding records. So where there is an ID that matches the person type, right? So only show me those records. And if we look at our where statements, right, our filters, our criteria here, we're saying, give me person type 1. I'm actually going to drop this. I'm just going to drop the person type. That's not important anymore. In fact, I can go ahead, well, I'll go ahead and leave salary people. This should only show me the people where the salary is 50,000, right? And that's really the only criteria that we're using to filter by, right? We're only filtering by that one criteria. So that means Steve Bishop should still show up, right? Because salary is still 50,000. But we changed person type to 3. And 3 is not a value in people types. So when we go and run this, because we're doing an inner join, if we save this and view the datasheet view, you'll notice that Steve is no longer there because there is no corresponding record. It doesn't know what type name to add, right? There is no type name for Steve because we said it's people type 3, and there is no people type 3. So that's how an inner join is working. It's saying only show me those records where there is a link between records of the two separate tables. If there is no link, if there is no corresponding record on that other table, don't show it. But we can change this. I really, 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 really want to see Steve. So I'm going to go back into the design view. And what I'm going to say is, I want this to be an outer join. So I'm going to go into the, well, let's drop down. Can we get the, I need to add the drop down here. There we go. And I'll just pin this so that we have it still. And what we want to do is we don't want this to be an inner join anymore. We want this to be what's called an outer join. So I'm going to right click on this relationship and I'm going to say join properties. And now what we have is this include all records from people types and only those records from people where the join fields are equal, or include all records from people and only those records from people types where the join fields are equal. So we've been on 1, which says only include rows where join fields from both tables are equal, right? That's what we call an inner join. Then there are 2 types of outer joins. One is called a left join and one is called a right join. But both together, a right or a left join, are what we call outer joins. It's just a matter of which one of the tables are you going to show all of the records for, right? And I want to see all of the records for people. So I'm going to select include all records from the people and only those records from the people types where the join fields are equal. So I'm going to select that and click OK. Now you'll notice that there is a different arrow here, right? We're saying instead of having the double arrow that we had before, now we only have one pointed arrow here for people types. And if we save this and we run this query, lo and behold, Steve Bishop comes back up, but now type name is null. This is not empty. This is not a blank string. This is actually null. It's returning a null value for type name. So that means I can see every record for people regardless of whether or not I have a type name. Now let's flip that. Let's take this and go back to the design view, and I'm going to go once again to the relationship here, and I'm going to right click and select join properties. And I'm going to switch to include all records from people types and only those records from people where the join fields are equal. So I'm kind of flipping it, right? I'm saying now show me all of the people type records, but only show me people that have a people type, right? That's what I'm essentially saying. So I'm going to go ahead and click OK, and we see that the reverse arrow has happened. Now the arrow is pointing to people. And if we save this and we once again run it by going to the datasheet view, notice that Steve is gone again. So we have our type names, but we don't have any people. Now, you might be wondering, how come I don't see any employees? We said we need to see all of the type names, right? We said we need to see all the type names. And where is the employee stuff? Well, we actually have a little caveat here, and that we're still saying the salary needs to be greater than or equal to 50,000. But if we have no employees, right? So if we go back to people, the only employee we have here is John Smith, and John Smith has a salary of 40,000. We've filtered out John Smith. We said don't show that one. So there is no employee record, right? So we need to drop that salary requirement in order to now get a full view of all of the records and their relationships. Okay, so just one little caveat we have to solve. We'll save this once again and go back to the datasheet view. And now we have, there's John Smith, who is an employee. But you'll notice that still Steve is gone, right? I am not on this list anywhere. And that's because I do not have a person type that matches any of the people types. And if I change this back to a 1 and rerun our query, so we'll save and go to design view and then reopen it in datasheet view, I will magically reappear. And if I go into people types and I add another one, so I'll say employee, customer, vendor, okay, which I guess has an employee ID of 4. That's kind of weird. I must have added a third one at some point. But let's go ahead and save this. So the ID for this one for a vendor is 4, right? So now we have a people types, but we don't have any corresponding people, right? No person type of 4. So now our query here, if we run this, go to design view and then switch back to datasheet view, we'll see vendor, but we don't even have a person. And that's because our query, once again, is saying, show me all of the people types. I can go here and right click and join properties. We'll see it says include all records from people types and only those records from people where the join fields are equal. Okay, so last thing I'm going to show you here in this video is kind of what's going on behind the scenes and how this arrow is changing directions. And it all has to do with what I said between left join and right join. They're both known as outer joins, right? So we're saying show me all the records of people types or show me all the records of people and only those of the other type of the other table. But what's going on with the SQL syntax? So I'm going to go to the SQL view, and you'll notice that the language of our from statement has switched to a left join. And what a left join means is we have a table over here on the left side of our join, and we're saying that left join, show me all of those records. So show me all of the records of the table to the left of our join statement. So all of our people types will be displayed. I can switch this from left to right. And just by doing that, I have switched it so that now the people table, which is the table described to the right side of our join, will be the table that shows all of the people. So if I save this, oops, let's go back, save and view, we're once again back to show me all of the records, whether or not they have a type name. And I can just prove this by going into people, change me back to a 3, which doesn't exist. We'll save that and go back to our query, design, view again, and now there you go. So Steve Bishop is now what we see, but we don't see a type name. And if I switch this from right join, which shows all people, to a left join, now we're going to see all of the people types, and only those people where those two values are equal between the ID column and the person type column. So save that, run it, and lo and behold, now we see the vendor, but Steve is gone, right? So that's how joins work, right? An inner join, show me only those records where there is some sort of value between people types ID and person type. So if I switch left back to inner join, that's now only going to show me people types and people where there is some sort of value equal to each other. So if I run that, we're only going to see those records. So Steve is gone and vendor is gone, right? There's no vendor, there's no Steve. Only the records where there is a type name or where there is a people type associated with a person, only those records will show, right? So that's how inner joins and outer joins work. Inner joins only show those records where there is an equal value. Outer joins can show you one of the tables completely, and if there's any missing values, those values will be null. And you can switch back and forth between which one of the tables is showing all of the records.